The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the charity warehouse as Diane Stevens stuffed another donated bicycle into her SUV, completely unaware that I'd been documenting her theft for 6 weeks. The same bicycle that was supposed to go to a 7-year-old whose mother worked 3 jobs but still couldn't afford. Christmas presents. My name's Carolyn. I'm 26, and I just learned that some people view charity work as a personal shopping opportunity. This is the story of how I discovered that protecting vulnerable families sometimes requires protecting them from the people claiming to help them. Carolyn. Make sure you update the inventory sheets to show these bikes were distributed to families, Diane called out, her voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd been exploiting charitable trust for months. We need accurate records for our donors. Accurate records. Diane was asking me to falsify documentation to cover her theft while maintaining the illusion that donations were reaching their intended recipients, the same donors who'd contributed thousands of dollars believing their generosity would help struggling families during the holidays. Which families received these bikes? I asked, pulling out my tablet to document her response. The Rodriguez family and the Williams family, she replied without hesitation, naming families I knew had been told there weren't enough bicycles available for their children this year. I made careful notes, adding this conversation to the comprehensive evidence file I'd been building since beginning my undercover investigation into missing donations at Hope for the Holidays, the same charity my grandmother had founded 30 years ago to ensure no child went without Christmas presents due to family financial struggles. My phone buzzed with a text from the private investigator my family had hired. Board meeting confirmed for tomorrow. All evidence compiled and ready for presentation. The board meeting that would expose Diane's systematic theft and determine the future of a charity program that was supposed to help the most vulnerable members of our community. Carolyn, you've been so helpful these past few months, Diane said, loading the last stolen bicycle into her vehicle. I really appreciate volunteers who understand that charity work requires flexibility and discretion. Flexibility and discretion. Code words for participating in theft and staying quiet about it. What Diane didn't understand was that my flexibility involved adapting investigation techniques to gather evidence, and my discretion involved carefully documenting crimes without alerting the perpetrator. I'm just glad I can contribute to helping families during the holidays, I replied honestly, thinking about the families who weren't receiving help because their donations had been redirected to Diane's personal use. The next morning, I sat in the Hope for the Holidays boardroom, surrounded by community leaders and major donors who'd gathered for the annual year-end review. The same donors who'd been unknowingly funding Diane's Christmas shopping through their charitable contributions. Before we review this year's distribution statistics, I announced, standing up to address the board, I think everyone should understand how donations have actually been handled by our volunteer coordination staff. Board Chair Patricia Martinez looked confused. Carolyn, I don't think volunteer reports are on today's agenda. They should be, I interrupted, connecting my laptop to the presentation screen. Especially when those volunteers have been systematically stealing from the families we're supposed to be helping. The room fell silent as I displayed the first photograph. Diane loading donated toys into her personal vehicle while children's names remained on our unfulfilled wish lists. Over the past 2 months, I've documented systematic theft of donations by volunteer coordinator Diane Stevens, I continued, showing time-stamped photos, video recordings, and falsified inventory records that painted a clear picture of charitable fraud. Carolyn, these are serious allegations, said board member Dr. Robert Chun. How did you gather this evidence? Through undercover investigation requested by the foundation's founding family, I replied, pulling out my identification and family documentation. I'm Carolyn Rodriguez, granddaughter of Hope for the Holidays founder, Rosa Rodriguez. The revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the meeting. What had seemed like accusations from a concerned volunteer became a formal investigation. Report from the charity's founding family. Grandmother Rosa received complaints from families about missing donations and asked me to investigate, I explained, showing the board comprehensive documentation of Diane's theft. What we discovered was systematic embezzlement disguised as administrative flexibility. I displayed financial records showing discrepancies between donated items and distributed gifts, inventory sheets that had been falsified to hide theft, and video evidence of Diane taking donations for personal use while denying assistance to qualifying families. The total value of stolen donations exceeds $37,000, I announced, consulting my investigation summary. Money and gifts that were supposed to help over 200 families during the Christmas season. Board member Sarah Wong reviewed the evidence on her tablet. Carolyn, this represents massive betrayal of charitable trust. How many families were affected by these thefts? Every family we turned away because we claimed to be out of resources, I replied, showing lists of families who'd been denied assistance while their donations were stolen. Children who went without Christmas presents because the volunteer coordinator decided they weren't as deserving as her own grandchildren. The evidence was overwhelming, systematic theft that had deprived vulnerable families of Christmas assistance while enriching someone who'd been trusted to protect charitable resources. What legal actions are available? Asked Dr. Chun. Criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, civil recovery of stolen funds, and complete restructuring of volunteer oversight to prevent future theft. I replied, consulting legal advice my family's attorneys had provided. The board voted unanimously to terminate Diane's position, pursue criminal charges, and implement new safeguards that would protect donations from exploitation by staff and volunteers. 2 weeks later, Diane was arrested at her home, surrounded by donated toys and clothing she'd stolen from charity programs. The evidence I'd gathered provided prosecutors with a comprehensive case for charitable fraud and embezzlement. Caroline's investigation prevented thousands of dollars in additional theft while documenting crimes that affect our community's most vulnerable families, said District Attorney Michael Santos during the press conference announcing charges. The most meaningful outcome wasn't Diane's prosecution, but the recovery of stolen donations and the implementation of transparency measures that restored community trust in our charitable programs. Your investigation has helped us develop better oversight procedures for all charitable organizations in the region, explained Nonprofit Accountability Director Dr. Jennifer Walsh. The systematic documentation you provided shows how internal theft can be prevented through proper monitoring and verification systems. 6 months later, Hope for the Holidays was operating under new management with transparent inventory systems, volunteer background checks, and independent auditing that ensured donations reached their intended recipients. We've seen a 60% increase in donations since implementing the new transparency measures, reported new Executive Director Maria Chun during our program review. Donors trust that their contributions are reaching families in need rather than being diverted for personal use. The most gratifying recognition came from families who received assistance after Diane's theft was stopped and proper distribution systems were implemented. My daughter got her Christmas bike because you made sure donations went to families instead of disappearing into someone's garage, wrote single mother Jennifer Martinez. Thank you for protecting programs that help children like mine. These letters reminded me that charitable fraud doesn't just steal money, it steals hope from families who depend on community generosity during their most difficult times. Sometimes the best way to protect charitable programs isn't trusting that everyone shares your commitment to helping others, but ensuring that systems exist to prevent exploitation of vulnerable populations by people who abuse positions of trust. Diane had betrayed the most fundamental principle of charity: work using resources meant for those in greatest need to benefit herself and her family. Her theft had deprived children of Christmas presents while enriching someone who already had the resources to provide for her own grandchildren. The young woman who'd volunteered to help needy families became the investigator who protected them from someone who viewed charity as a personal shopping opportunity. proving that sometimes the most important charitable work involves ensuring that charity actually reaches the people it's meant to serve. The ripple effects of exposing Diane's theft extended beyond our individual charity into broader reforms of nonprofit oversight and accountability measures that protected vulnerable populations from exploitation by people in positions of trust. Caroline's investigation methodology has been adopted by other charitable organizations as a model for preventing internal fraud, said Nonprofit Oversight Director Dr. Patricia Williams. Her systematic documentation techniques help charities identify and address theft before it becomes widespread. The investigation had revealed patterns of charitable fraud that were more common than most donors realized, leading to industry-wide improvements in volunteer screening, donation tracking, and transparency reporting. We've implemented Caroline's verification protocols across all our community service programs, explained United Way Director Michael Santos. The checks and balances she developed prevent staff and volunteers from exploiting charitable resources while maintaining efficient service delivery. 1 year after exposing Diane's theft, I was invited to serve on the state's Charitable Oversight Committee, helping develop policies that protected both donors and recipients from fraud within nonprofit organizations. Your experience investigating charitable theft from the inside has given you unique insights into how these crimes operate, said Committee Chair Dr. Robert Martinez. The prevention strategies you've developed are being used to train nonprofit administrators across multiple states. The educational impact included workshops for charity volunteers and staff about recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior, ethical guidelines for handling donations, and legal frameworks that protected whistleblowers who reported charitable fraud. The most important lesson from Caroline's case is that charitable work attracts both genuine altruists and people who exploit others' generosity. I explained during training sessions for nonprofit workers. Protecting vulnerable populations requires vigilance, even toward people who claim to share your mission. 2 years after the initial investigation, I received an unexpected letter from Diane herself, written from her community service assignment as part of her criminal sentence. Caroline, I wanted to write and acknowledge that you were right to expose what I was doing, her letter began. I convinced myself that taking some donations for my family was acceptable because I was working hard as a volunteer. But I realize now that I was stealing from children who needed those gifts more than my grandchildren did. Her letter continued, the families I deprived of Christmas assistance deserved better from someone they trusted to help them. Your investigation protected them from continued theft and forced me to confront how selfish and harmful my behavior had become. The personal accountability was more genuine than I'd expected from someone whose theft had been so systematic and callous. What would you tell other charity workers who might be tempted to take donations for personal use? I wrote back that those donations represent hope for families in their darkest moments. And betraying that trust causes harm that extends far beyond the monetary value of what you steal, she replied. The disappointment on children's faces when they don't get promised gifts stays with them long after Christmas is over. 3 years later, Hope for the Holidays had become a model charitable organization with transparent operations, comprehensive oversight, and donation tracking systems that ensured community generosity reached its intended recipients. Our program now serves twice as many families as before Caroline's investigation, reported current director Maria Chun during our annual review. Donors trust that their contributions make a real difference, and families know they can rely on receiving the assistance we promise. The transformation demonstrated that exposing charitable fraud could strengthen rather than damage community trust when followed by genuine reforms and transparent accountability measures. What's the most important outcome from your investigation? Asked a journalism student writing about nonprofit accountability. Ensuring that children who depend on Christmas charity actually receive it, I replied. Diane's theft wasn't just stealing objects, it was stealing Christmas morning joy from families who had nothing else to hope for during the holidays. The most meaningful recognition came from families who'd received assistance after reforms were implemented, many of whom wrote to thank me for protecting programs they depended on during financial emergencies. "My son got his Christmas presents because you made sure the toy drive money went to toys instead of someone's pocket," wrote single father David Rodriguez. "You gave him a Christmas he'll remember for the right reasons." These testimonials reminded me that charitable fraud doesn't just involve financial theft, it involves stealing hope, dignity, and special moments from people who are already struggling with poverty and hardship. Sometimes the most important charitable work isn't directly helping people in need, but protecting them from exploitation by ensuring that charitable resources actually reach their intended recipients, rather than being diverted by people who abuse positions of trust. Diane had transformed a program designed to help vulnerable families into her personal shopping service, stealing Christmas joy from children whose only hope for holiday gifts came from community generosity. Her betrayal had violated the most fundamental principle of charity work, using donated resources to help those most in need rather than to benefit yourself. The investigation that started with concern for missing bicycles had evolved into comprehensive reforms that protected charitable programs throughout our region, proving that individual acts of fraud could motivate systematic changes when exposed and addressed through proper legal and administrative channels. Character count: 847 characters.